Hey, Danae. We're just going to be talking about everything that we kind of remember from our virtual classwork yesterday. So we're going to talk about some things on the board, and then we're going to be taking notes. So you can take out whatever you need to take notes, and then you can put them in your copybook or document, wherever you want to store them. All right, someone give me something. Something you remember, Tia?
Like behavior.
Behavior, okay. Behavior. What else? What else? All right. Dreams. That was another one. Are you Sasha?
Yeah.
Nice. Sasha?
Counseling psychology.
What was that?
Counseling psychology.
Counseling psychology, really cool. Anybody surprised by the number of different psychologies there were? Quite a few, right? Counseling psychology, right? So that's something that Mrs. Smith would have had to really study in college, probably multiple courses, especially because she wanted to work in a school. Anything else that we remember? Do you want to take out your the notes on your laptop and look at them really quick? Allison?
There's like major and then there's applied.
One more time?
There's major and then there's applied fields.
Good. Anybody else, Tia?
Talk about their goals.
Goals. Cool. I know your name. Nice.
Yeah. Cognitive activities.
Cognitive activities, right? Like a dream. And one more, maybe?
Like along with the behavioral process, there's a mental process.
Good. All right, girls. Good job. Keep these in mind as we're going to go through Psychology Unit 1. Let's see. So those pages that I gave you guys to read, they were out of the psychology textbook that we have. I don't think there are enough for this room. So whenever we do readings, I'll just give you a PDF if that's all right. Also this way, you don't have to lug around that textbook, especially if we're not going to be really using it that much. So that's where it's coming from. So let's take a look at Psychology Unit 1. So psyche itself comes from the Latin meaning soul, and ology is the study of. I'm sure a lot of you have picked up on this at this point. Theology, geometry, ology, right? All of the studies that you kind of look at end in the suffix O-L-O-G-Y, which is the study of. Why would this field be called study of the soul when it's actually the study of the mind? Do you think that psychology is scientific or philosophical? This is going to be the essential question that we're looking at throughout this presentation. Do you think psychology is scientific or philosophical, and why? You can jot that down in your notebook. All right, how many people think it's scientific? How many girls think it might be scientific? Okay, a few. What about philosophical? All right, why do some of us think that it might be more scientific than it would be philosophical? When you think of science, what do you think of? Let's start there. When you think of science, what do you think of? Allison?
Like experiments.
Experiments, good. And when you think of philosophy, what comes to mind? Right, think back to, like your Aristotle, your Socrates, your Plato. You think of philosophy, because when everyone goes to college, I'm almost going to guarantee you have to take at least 2 philosophy courses. And they're not great, but everybody gets through it, so it's fine. What do you think, what comes to mind when you think philosophy? Mrs. Kaz would be really upset, and so Mrs. Castellano. Tia, give me anything.
Like random ideas.
Okay, that's actually really funny, but yeah, pretty much that's what it sounds like. Each philosopher has their own set of ideas, and they try to prove that through going on these long tirades and these long explanations to prove their ideas, to prove that their ideas are, more developed or supported by more evidence than others. Even though with philosophy, it's a lot of ideas, a lot of it is also evidence-based. It's backed by evidence, because whenever you make a claim, you need to support it with evidence. But when we think of philosophy, we think of like a deeper meaning. And we think about how we personally view things and how it makes us feel with philosophy. So why would you girls think that psychology would be either of these? For example, someone who thinks that psychology is more scientific, give me a reason why. Give me a reason why. Tia?
So like chemicals in the brain.
Chemicals in the brain, yeah. Right? You wouldn't necessarily think that Aristotle had any idea what was going on with that. All right, so maybe chemicals in the brain. What else? Someone mentioned it already. When you think science, right? You're upstairs with your little lab coats on, your little goggles. To conduct what, Maddie? An experiment. Can anybody remember or name an experiment? From their reading? Or from the video we saw the other day? We're not going to look at it today, but has anyone ever heard of the prison experiment? So we'll look at it, but just to give you guys an idea, basically, a group of college friends were recruited from a college to conduct an experiment, and it was not to prove, but to explore the relationship between prison guards and prisoners. And in the beginning, they assigned random people in the group to be prison guards, and then they assigned random people in the group to be prisoners. And basically, by the end, the students that were selected to be the prison guards had a very noticeably like self-induced idea of authority. And they actually so much as would put their former peers into solitary confinement when they were protesting, and they weren't allowed to leave. And we're going to look at it, but those kind of experiments really, really show you how complex the human brain is. So, one hand for scientific, if you think it's scientific. Anybody think it's philosophical? All right, we'll explore that. Understanding the mind. So why is our scientific idea of psychology so limited? Science deals with facts, things that can be measured, and if philosophy has a lot to do with human thought and thinking and reflection, how can we measure that? How can you measure a thought? Can you guys even see that? Barely? Sweet Lord. I didn't even realize it was so tiny. Oh, maybe that would help anyways. Any better? No. Yep, you're right. How about we do this? Is this about to make me look really stupid? Is this gonna go?
Oh, no.
It's worse. It's worse. Okay. Today's probably like, what is she doing? Yeah, let's see. There has to be a zoom feature on this thing. Ooh. Doesn't take a rocket scientist, but still. All right. Can we see that?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So the empirical method. This is a method used to acquire knowledge based off of observations and experimentation rather than facts. Why would an empirical method be more effective with psychology rather than other scientific experiments? Why do you think? No wrong answers. This is new to everybody. Well, look at this question, okay? And then think about those little science experiments you did like when you were younger in the classroom, where you would water a plant every day and it would grow, and you would pull out your little ruler and you would measure it and see how many inches it grew. And then you could jot down, 2 ounces of water and plenty of sunlight results in, the plant doubling in size in a week. Why can't that work why don't you think that can work with psychology? Maddie?
Because you can't really see anything.
You can't see into the mind, okay? You can't see into the mind. Rather, how could you keep track of someone's progress or their regression with psychology? How do you think we could do this without using facts? We can't use facts because every individual is different. Every individual's mind is different. So try to answer this question in your copybook, referring back to that question, that idea. Let's see. Anybody? Tia?
6, you can't how you just said you can't really see into the mind.
You can't, exactly. That's a good way to put it, right? You can't see into somebody's mind. You can't put a numerical value on someone's happiness that day or someone's anxiety. You can't really put a numerical value on somebody's mental state, but you can jot down observations, okay? You can jot down growth or improvement as measured by certain indicators. So the empirical method is also used in political science. And the empirical method, okay, you don't really measure using numbers. You can, but we're looking at qualitative data. We're looking at rather than quantitative data. So what we're looking at is indicators. What is an indicator, right? So let's say we're measuring child well-being in a school. Child well-being in schools. What do you think would be an indicator to measure child well-being? We're looking at child, here we go. What do you think would be an indicator? An example of an indicator too, that you can measure to see if a child is okay at school. How many absences does this child have? What else? Give me something. An indicator, something that we can look at and say, oh, okay. How many times has this child been absent? What are some other ways that this child is indicating that he or she is well or is not well?
Their grades.
Grades.
How they react to other students.
How they socialize with their peers, very well, very good. Maddie?
Participation in class.
Participation in class. What else? Let's go over here. Their hygiene. Any other ideas? Do you see how these types of indicators, do you see how these can't necessarily be measured just by looking through facts? It's acquiring knowledge based off of an observation. If you are a teacher and you see and you observe your students and you're trying to make sure that everyone's okay, but the same child keeps coming to school dirty, or the same child is isolated from his or her peers, and the same child, might be absent. It's worth looking into seeing, is this child okay? What is the well-being of this child? Now, do you see how this is not the same as a scientific experiment where you're measuring how quickly a plant grows or fitness over time? Do you see how this might be different, how we have to use different methods to reach these conclusions? Okay. So, the history of psychology. Pre-19th century, the study of the mind was more philosophical. Why do you think that the study of the mind in the past would have been more philosophical? How would the time period dictate the way psychology was viewed? Sasha?
Because we didn't know what we know now.
Okay, so, and by things that we know now, do you mean like data?
Yeah.
Okay, less data. And how do we typically increase the amount of data that we have accessible to us? Through what? Technology, right? Right, technological advances. All right, good. The founders of psychology, there are two. They're William Wundt and William James, and they had two very different approaches to psychology. And both of their works ended up leading psychology to shift to a more science-based study than philosophy. Is everybody okay with this? I can erase it? Cool. Oh, thanks. All right, Danae, I'll stop this video and then